There's a big mistake that I see a lot of women make when it comes to fat loss. And when I say big, I mean huge. And when I say women, I mean women over the age of 40 who have a lot of weight to lose. And when I say women, I mean really smart, highly motivated women that have a lot of weight to lose. And when I say a lot of weight, I just want to put that into perspective as well. So when we're talking about a lot of weight to lose, obviously a lot is relative because it's relative to you. Something that somebody else may feel like a lot may not feel like a lot to somebody else. So for a frame of reference, just for the sake of getting the general information out, we're talking about women that are over the age of 40 who've been around the block, the dieting block, a time or two, and they're, let's say, over 30 to 35% in body fat. So they haven't quite gotten under that 29 to 30% body fat range yet. The reason why I say that is because that's kind of a milestone range for a lot of women who've kind of allowed their weight to creep up in midlife and beyond. So a lot of charts and things like that, body fat percentages, that's what's going to put you back within what could be considered the lean and or average range for someone who is that age. So we're going to say anyone who's above 30% body fat, which I went into a lot more detail with this in my podcast about the trade-offs of different body fat percentages and kind of what to expect with each one. But what I want to discuss today is this bigger picture thing, this big mistake that I see highly motivated women make when it comes to losing fat after 40. And typically this started way before 40. And that is using techniques and tactics and strategies that are meant for someone that is at a different body fat percentage than you. So for someone that has 10, 20, 30% body fat that they want to lose, losing the last 5 to 10% of their body fat is using. That is huge. The tactics that you would need to lose the first, let's say 50 to 100 pounds are going to be a lot different than what you need to do to implement losing the last 5 to 20 pounds. So whenever I see someone that's in that category, someone that has 50, 75, 100 pounds to lose, and they're executing tactics of someone who is on their last 5, 10, 15 pounds, it's a huge red flag because not only is that tactic eventually going to stall out and they're going to be met with a plateau, they're not going to have a lot of options for what to do about it when that time comes. So that's why it's such a huge mistake, because when you're implementing things well before their time and then they stop working, you don't have any more cards on the table. You don't have any more tricks up your sleeve. You don't have anywhere else to go. So the plateaus last longer. Plateau should be expected when you're on the last 5, 10, 20 pounds, maybe even up to the last 30 pounds. But when you're hitting these huge flat lines and you have 50, 75, 100 more pounds to go, that can be extremely frustrating. Not saying it's not frustrating on the other end too, and obviously the reverse applies to that as well, which is a totally different conversation, but that is a big mistake, is when you are at the front end of your journey and you're executing as if you are at the finish line. So to put this in a perspective, these are tactics that I talked about in the Stubborn Fat Loss Tactics series. When we're talking about stuff like doing like 2-a-days with cardio in the morning and cardio at night, or doing fasted cardio in the morning and then, going and lifting, or even doing a lot of intermittent fasting, or taking your carbs super low or your calories really, really low in the very beginning of your journey. These are all tactics that typically are not necessary in the beginning stages. So even though it may look really cool and you may see someone that gets that first, 10, 20, 30 pounds off really quickly, and that may be motivating for someone who has a lot of weight to lose to feel like you are kickstarting things. But the caveat to that is that kickstart comes back to bite you in the butt later when things flatline, when you can no longer move forward in your journey. So if you are someone who has a lot of weight to lose. You are in the high 30s, 40s, even above 50% body fat, and you're needing to execute tactics like two-a-days, like fasted cardio, like intermittent fasting, like super low carb or keto, like over relying on different supplements and things like that, or paying really close attention to your nutrient timing windows and, BCAAs and intra-workout shakes and all of these other elements. If you find yourself doing that or having to eat really strict clean or eliminating, trigger foods or eliminating like food groups altogether, if you find yourself on that end of the spectrum and feel like you have no choice, you have to execute on that level in order to get the smallest minutia of movement on the scale, that is pointing to a bigger problem. So I'm not saying that someone may not experience the need for those tips and tricks and tactics, but usually it's because they fell into that in the first place. It's because they fell down that rabbit hole of making this huge mistake. And then in order to fix it, you need more extreme strategies. You need more, 25% and below tactics versus things that would work at somebody at a higher body fat percentage. So if you're at a higher body fat percentage and you're noticing those things, it's time to stop and take a look at the bigger picture. Do you need to add more muscle mass to your frame? Do you need to stop and do a metabolism reset and work on increasing the amount of calories or carbs or something that you have now and decreasing your need and dependence on cardio for fat loss? So sometimes you have to stop and take a break to disconnect from the things that you feel like you need to do in order for them to work, in order to get back to a state where you don't need them, so that they are a tip or a strategy or something that you can have in your back pocket when you are closer to the finish line. And the upside of this is that if you're someone who, let's say, has no intentions on going below 30% body fat, that means that you should be able to get to your goal without ever having to execute those things, which is usually a bonus because a lot of them aren't really something that you can do long term, as in for life. So if you're able to get there without having to execute those things, then you don't have to worry about having the repercussions of stopping them when you get to your goal and then yo-yoing back up to where you were before. So this is something that I highly recommend taking into consideration if you're somebody who feels like you have to do those things, you feel like they're necessary for your progress. Stop and analyze why. And this is something that I even have to do with clients, because there is nothing worse than someone coming to me who is, maybe in their 40s, 50s, 60s. They're eating at the rock bottom amount of calories. Their carbs are extremely low. They're doing tons and tons of exercise and workouts, especially cardio, and they are on a plateau. And we have to have this bigger picture conversation of, what are you willing to stop doing in order to fix this? Are you willing to slow down to speed up? Because when I do get that client who they want to keep pushing through, they haven't reset to the full amount, they haven't, slowed down on their cardio and things like that, what I find is that we still end up hitting that same plateau, and we kind of get to that, inevitable, like I told you so moment where they finally see that it doesn't matter how hard we push. It's time to stop and take a break and increase those calories and decrease the cardio and put on some muscle mass. So if you don't know how much muscle mass you have in your frame, I highly recommend figuring that out, either going and getting, some caliper testing done, or if you have a way or access to getting a DEXA scan near you or something like that to see how much body fat you actually have, because that is usually the baseline where I start most clients. And that's usually where it's a more eye-opening experience, because whereas they may have been thinking like, okay, I only need to lose about 30 pounds. If they go and they get this scan and they realize like, okay, I'm at 54% body fat, and in order to get within, healthy ranges for me, that means being, 32, 28% body fat or something like that. They realize, okay, now we're talking about double-digit body fat percent loss, which means we're going to have to use different tactics. They realize that the journey is going to be longer than they expected, because maybe they got into a habit of just losing 10 pounds, just losing 30 pounds, because of the fact that they were using these tactics that tend to stop and tend to kind of flatline after that amount. Am I saying that you can't lose more weight? You can't lose 60 pounds or something like that eating low carb? No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that you really want to take into consideration how extreme you have to be when you are above 30% body fat trying to lose. That is not normal, and it shouldn't be necessary. So it's not that it won't be necessary for some people, or that it won't be necessary after 30%, which, like I said, is a completely different conversation, because there is the flip side of that, of the people who are in the 20s and not willing to do more than what they did to get there. So there will be a time and place where those things might shift, and you might have to actually start doing more. So you don't want to have already used that up, especially if you have a very moderate goal to begin with. There's no reason to be extreme in what you're doing if the goal isn't extreme. Save the extreme tactics for the people that are doing the things that are over the top, for the people that do have the, like, fitness accounts and photo shoots and competitions and celebrities and things like that. Like, let them be extreme, because they are going above and beyond. They're going to levels that are unrealistic, unmaintainable for the average person. The average person should not have to do above average things to get an average result. So just a little food for thought. Like I said, this is something that I see the most brilliant, highly motivated women do, and I don't even think they realize that it's a mistake. It's just that they're so highly motivated that that's why they're doing it, because they're ready. They want to do what it takes to get the weight off. They're ready to do whatever, and so they go and they look and they're researching. And like I said, because they're so smart, sometimes they end up over researching, and they're jumping into tactics, or they're jumping ahead a couple of steps because of the fact that they feel like, well, that'll get me there faster, which it might, but if it doesn't last and if it's not maintainable for you in the long run, then what was the point, right? So I will point to some of the videos that I've done on this in the past, especially the stubborn fat loss video and the podcast that I did on the trade-offs at different levels of leanness, because it is worth deciding where that trade-off begins and ends for you, and what's worth it to you and what's not, so that you know to stop when enough is enough and to plan for that level. So thank you guys for joining, and I will see you in the next one.